mad, you're mad, the news headlines are mad, we're all mad. And because we're mad, we're going to cancel everybody. You don't agree with me? Fine, you're canceled. Blocked and deleted permanently. Is it just me, or is that kind of how life in America feels right now in 2022? I mean, plus gas prices, inflation on the food costs, all of that. That's life in 2022.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Pastor Coye.
And I'm Pastor Jessie.
Welcome to the Pulpit Aside, where we discuss topics and have challenging conversations, pulpit aside.
Pulpit aside. Today we want to dive into the lost art of conversation. It's kind of the premise of our podcast, really. Instead of preaching a message or trying to get everyone to amen and agree, we're setting out here to try to have some uncommon exchanges. So, with the rise of social media and technology, information at our fingertips, why does it seem like we no longer know how to relate to people and communicate, particularly in challenging situations? How did we get here, Coye?
You know, I like what you said just a moment ago when you said we're trying to get everyone to amen and agree, not recognizing that we don't necessarily have to all agree. In fact, we're probably not going to agree on everything. And so I think part of the struggle in 2022 and what has even taken place over the last several years, politically, socially, is we're actually trying to get people to agree with us, to say that we're right, as opposed to simply just accept the fact that my vantage point, my perspective, my lens may be a little bit differently than yours.
Right.
And can you at least appreciate and maybe at times even respect my lens and my vantage point, just like you're asking me to accept yours, as opposed to agree with it.
But how do we get here? Why has this become the normal that you have to agree with me rather than we can choose to, as they say, agree to disagree?
Because I want to be right.
Why?
Because it feels good to be right.
It does.
Yeah, don't you like being right?
I mean, I'm always right.
Well, see, there you go. See?
But if I'm always
talk to
right,
your
then
wife
at
about
least
that.
I'm okay with you being wrong.
Well, exactly. That means you have to agree. I have to agree that you're right and I'm always wrong.
Oh, you're
And
always wrong.
Who's going to agree with that?
Because we all always want to be right.
Yes.
Is that it?
Feels good.
But that's not new, is it?
It's not. But I think with social media and so many people being able to have quick access to not only information, but people.
Everyone has a voice.
Yes.
That hasn't always been
and
the
everyone
case.
has always had a voice. You just didn't always hear everyone's
You
voice.
couldn't always project your voice.
Yes. And now people can project it in social media streams and in ways in which it's very easy for me to hear you disagree with me. And then I have to now tell you why your disagreement with me is wrong or not right, so that way I can get you to agree with me, because you have publicly told people you disagree. And you know, so if you'd have kept it to yourself, then we wouldn't have had a problem. But you started.
But now I'm public. Now I got to defend my
Yes.
stance, and I got to defend myself against you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's technology. I think it's social media. I do feel like, and we're not going to go political today, I don't think, but I feel like since around 2016, you know, in a Trump presidency, wherever you land on that, we lost the art of respectful, civil, public debate.
Okay.
I feel like it's been a downhill slope since there. Now it just feels like, well, I'm right, you're wrong, and you have to pick a side. But then it's more than that, because then, you know, we create camps, public camps, and if you're not with me, then now you're evil. Like if we villainize the other side.
Yeah.
And it's become so easy to do that. And I think technology has a lot to do with that, because we've started to create a culture where we relate so much between these two-dimensional screens. You know, whether it's a phone or it's a computer, and I see the text that you put out there, or the message you put out there, or the meme that you put out there, and that becomes who you are to me. And then I feel like we get so used to relating one another through two-dimensional screens that we forget that every person we're interacting with is actually 3D. You know what I mean? This is a real person.
Yes.
You're like, I know that about me.
That's a
like
good
I
point.
know what my reasons are. I know my history, the trauma that's informed me to where I am, the experience that I've had that have grown the convictions in me. But we don't see that, I feel like, when we're dealing with other people, because we're used to seeing them flat. I see your positions, but I forget to realize that behind your position is a person with experiences and thoughts. They've actually probably, hopefully, thought through their reasons before putting their position out there. But we treat them as just, you can't possibly be thinking with a logical mind, you're obviously evil, and we forget how to interact with a three-dimensional person who has a history and a brain and a heart.
Yeah.
Like,
that's good.
I think that it really, in many ways, is the product of a technology and social media age.
That's a good point. If I were going to use a biblical illustration, there is I know it's not sermon time, but
put the pulpit aside, bro. No, go ahead.
In the Bible, Jesus talks about the wheat and the tares. For this, we'll say the wheat and the weeds, just because it sounds better alliteration-wise. And so the sower goes out and he sows good seed in his field. And then while he's asleep, the enemy comes and sows tares or weeds that could hurt or harm the wheat. The verse goes on to say that then the enemy leaves. And so the enemy comes while they're asleep undetected. The enemy leaves undetected. And it's not until the plants begin to grow that the master and the servants even begin to realize that the enemy has been in the field. And so the enemy's presence is not known until evidence of it is seen. And it has taken some time, a few days, a few weeks before stuff sprouted. Now you can see, there's some weeds in my wheat. I didn't plant the weed. We just planted the wheat. How'd the weeds get there? I think what 2016 and beyond has done is I think it was sprouting based on what had been planted, 10, 20 years prior. Because I, too, have said to myself, as a kid, I don't think politics was this toxic.
Right.
I don't think they were this divided.
Right.
When I think back to my mom and my dad having conversations about politics and presidential candidates, I think it was this divided. It wasn't as many platforms that hadn't gotten as heated. And the more layers you put on top of stuff, more opportunity to get people to speak, the more you start to see the manifestation of the tares or the weeds that have been planted while some of us were asleep.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was thinking, people have always gotten heated about politics, right? But when did it become so divisive? Is it just that it's come to maturity? Because in my mind, and I'm reaching to days I didn't live through, right? But I feel like there was a day, or at least when I wasn't conscious of it because I was a kid, where you could come to a family gathering and, Uncle Joe and Uncle, Fred would get heated about politics over the table. But at the end of the day, we're still family. We still love each other. Yeah. And now, I hear stories of for real stories, since the pandemic, people won't go to the family gatherings because it's going to get so heated about what you believe about masks or vaccines or politics that you don't even want to go.
Yeah.
Because somehow we can't live beyond our difference of opinion.
Or maybe it's because when Uncle Joe and Uncle Fred had that conversation 15 or 20 years ago, Uncle Joe and Uncle Fred actually didn't have 10 other friend groups that they could join who thought only like them. Whereas
a tribe behind them.
Yeah, that's right. So today, if I don't like what you're saying or we disagree, I can just get on Facebook, I can get on Snapchat, YouTube, I can go on any social media site
congregation,
find my group of people who will co-sign and cheer me on. I'm like, what? I'm rolling with y'all now.
We feel validated.
That's right.
We have the strength of the people behind me. Right?
And so, back in the day, you didn't get to go to Families Are Us and pick who you wanted to be your family. Today,
Yeah, wow.
we have access to Families Are Us. And so you can choose you want to be in your family. Right?
Virtual tribes. Right. So, virtual tribes.
Yes.
And tribalism.
Yeah.
So, but you've learned to have conversation in the midst of challenges, difficulty, disagreement. So I would love to hear about a time you learned the power of true exchange and conversation, maybe a moment that was really challenging or really educational in your own life.
That's good. I'm going to try not to use a church illustration because we don't want to keep bringing the pulpit into the equation.
Church is full of real people, right? You got difficult people everywhere.
Well, that part is true.
You got difficult people in your house, in your church.
You want to throw my wife underneath the bus on this one, huh?
I did not. I'm talking about not your wife.
All right,
obviously. She's perfect.
So Oh goodness, yeah, she's probably listening. She loved that.
Maybe you've learned a lot about having challenging conversation with your wife.
Well, I have.
She's a really
Obviously.
good communicator.
She is a good
actually.
communicator. Sometimes she's a hard communicator too because she can be so direct and so blunt.
I appreciate that though.
Some people do. Not all of us appreciate
right.
that bluntness and that directness at times.
We need it. We need it though.
One of the things that I learned when I was in high school, one of the first situations in which I was dealing with someone else and communication became important, and then also learning lessons from this experience in communication was first time somebody came to me and asked for relationship advice. Okay? Young man, young lady.
Like I got a crush on this girl.
Yeah, high school. They like each other, and they begin to share kind of some of what they're dealing with, what they're going through. And they're looking for a third party or just someone that kind of like, that they both agree would probably not be biased.
So they came to Pastor Coye.
Well, at the time I wasn't Pastor Coye, but
maybe you were.
The anointing was there, all right? And so as they started to kind of express how they felt and what they were thinking, it was in this moment that I began to realize that at times part of the problem was one was talking, and while the one was talking, the other one was really thinking about their rebuttal to what the one was saying. So they weren't listening. They were only listening to attack, not listening to accept or to understand. And so it was times like that, early experiences, where I began to really be able, like my mother, navigate through people's emotions and feelings and try to get to the real issue that was at hand. So because you do something to make me mad doesn't mean I don't have the right to mistreat you because I'm mad.
That's good.
I got to really ask the question, what is it that you did and why did it hurt me?
Well, that's good.
Because if I can communicate that to you, I can be angry, I can be mad, but I haven't attacked you now dealing with what Satan would use to kind of like masquerade as an issue, my feelings, as opposed to a real issue. And I think a lot of times in life, dude, we get so away from the main issue so that way we can disguise what's really going on. And all of a sudden now we're arguing and fighting with our emotions and feelings and no more rationale, thought, or thinking.
What do you mean we get away from the main issue?
Okay, so, oh goodness, there are so many issues out there. Okay, I'll give you one that is long past and maybe it'll make sense. Trayvon Martin, okay? Part of that case that they were trying to prove with George Zimmerman is that it was racially motivated and that he was prejudiced, he was racist, and so this was a hate crime. And it's hard to really prove what anybody is thinking or feeling unless you have evidence that they said it, they wrote it down, they told somebody. Like you didn't have any of that. All you had was a conversation that he had with the 911 operator. And sure, I'm sure some of his motivation you could say was some of that. The color of Trayvon's skin, the hoodie he was wearing, like all of that, the crime in the community, all those are motivations. Let's not deal with whether or not it was a hate crime up front. Let's ask ourselves the question, did you impose on this young man's rights after being told not to engage by the very police you called? So we're going to try this case, not from the standpoint that you were racist, it was racially motivated, and we got to get you, because if we get you with that, we get you with this real serious crime, we all get to celebrate. Man, let's just deal with the fact that you violated somebody's rights. Regardless. And you were told by the authorities not to engage, and you did. You got to go to prison because you didn't obey the proper authorities, and you also imposed on someone else's rights. Now, the hate thing, and we can deal with that later. If we want to add some more time, we got away from the issue. And the whole trial was trying to prove whether or not it was racially motivated.
Right.
How you going to prove somebody's motivations and you don't have a motivation?
It's impossible most of the time. In any relationship even to really know the motivation of the person.
Absolutely.
Unless they tell you directly themselves. They reveal it. That's crazy though, right? Like, because we assume motive all the time.
All the time.
Like, because somebody didn't smile at me, they must be mad. Like, maybe they
had a bad day. Maybe
it had nothing to do with you.
Maybe they were looking in your direction, but was totally someplace else. And
all right, so assuming motive
is
definitely on the no-no list.
No.
Having good
one of the things I learned in communication.
But you're so right about, like, we get away from the root issue. Like, let's talk about you're talking about, like, societal issues, but even in relationships, sometimes we're responding negatively to someone Because, yeah, like you said, we had a bad day. Work was stressful. You come home and suddenly everything is making you mad. You have 10 fights with your kids and your wife. You kick the dog, and they didn't do anything.
Right, nothing.
It's because everything at work was stressful. Like, there's something about learning to be self-aware, too, and taking a deep breath long enough to, like, recognize the root.
Yes.
I think is really helpful.
Yeah, recognize the root.
Too.
Yes.
And being willing to address your root instead of acting out on everybody.
Yep.
You know, and I think that we maybe we never had that, but we've definitely lost it.
Yes, yes. And you know, if I was in church, I might say, let's deal with the root, not the fruit. You know, because the fruit is what you see.
Sounds so good when you say it like that.
The fruit is what you see. The root is the real problem.
Totally.
And so that was one of the things I learned early in communicating, just trying to help, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend talk through something. I could tell that at some point they got away from whatever the issue was because emotions got involved, and now you're arguing stuff that was never even a part of the initial problem.
Yeah, it's the surface stuff. It's the kick the dog stuff.
Yes. Wow.
So I remember an experience I had that was really helpful and educational and marked me in a good way for just even who I am today. When I was a youth pastor like 15 some odd years ago, met another youth pastor named Scott Dunford. Scott, if you're out there listening, shout out to you. You're awesome. And he was a very academic sort of guy, and he very different from me in that. But we had built some relationship. I think we had some measure of trust. And he said he knew that theologically, doctrinally, we came from different camps, if you will. And he wanted to explore it together. I'd never had anyone approach me like this. He said, let's read this book together. And what it was about was sort of, a take on the spectrum of beliefs within Christian churches on the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And so it explored three camps. Cessationism that says like the power gifts ended with the apostles. Then what they called an open but curious stance, where you're like, this could happen. I haven't seen it, but it could happen. And then there was what they called classic Pentecostalism. And so it kind of went through all those. And so we decided to talk about it. And what was really fun about that is his church affiliation was very cessationist. I come from more of a charismatic, I wouldn't call it classic Pentecostalism. There are some things in there that I don't necessarily agree with, but he would have put himself on the open but curious things.
And you were beyond open but curious, you would say.
I mean, I have full faith for all that stuff. So and we can talk about that another time. But what was great about this, the conversation was we're so different with such different approaches. And he's a pretty, at that time, dogmatic guy. Like, he'd been through Bible college. Like, he was into all the theologians. Like, he named his kids after dead theologians. Like, that's how into it he was. And that's just not me. But we were able to have respectful dialogue and disagree and still be friends. And, you know, I think we had our convictions, but I think because there was a level of respect and saying, let's learn and grow together, that we are actually able to learn and understand. And again, get beyond the two-dimensional of here's your statement of faith, here's my statement of faith, and let's see if we can beat each other up with them, but seeing the person on the other side. Who has a story, and I got to share my story of what I'd experienced, why I believe what I believe, and same for him. And I learned so much from that of just we can be from different camps, still be friends. And actually, I think our respect for one another grew because of having these challenging conversations, but still being friends. Instead of blocked, deleted, you're out of my camp. You know what I mean? And we're still friends to this day. Although I will say, he had some, interesting experiences. He went off on the field as a missionary and saw things that he'd never seen and experienced. So it's amazing how our life experience too will inform. I'd say we're way more in agreement on those things today, but that's not the heart of the matter today, what we're talking about. But it was about someone being willing to step into what could be dangerous territory. And not trying to, nobody was trying to win anybody's case. It's let's learn and grow together. I want to understand you. I want to understand why you believe what you believe. I want to know you better as a person. And look, it's grown, and we barely knew each other then. But again, we're still friends 15 years later. We're across the nation now. But we could meet up and strike up a conversation today, and still have that mutual respect. And so I think what I learned from that was like not being afraid of that. Like I think for me, it was his initiation. But since he made the invitation, I was willing to get in the conversation. But before that, I think I'm more of a like, let's just get along kind of guy. Let's stay on the surface. I may in my mind be thinking, I know you and I don't agree on this, so I'm actually not going to bring it up.
Right.
Like, let's not talk about the stuff that we disagree on. Let's just stay where we know that we agree. Let's stay in the shallow waters of agreement and not those shark-infested waters of disagreement. But I learned that it can be safe out there and actually beneficial.
You know, that's a good point. I think it actually oftentimes is safe out there in those shark-infested waters of disagreement. As you were talking, one of the things I thought about, maybe part of the reason why people don't want to remain friends or they do cancel someone that they're listening to who they have heard for a long time and all of a sudden I disagree is because the longer I listen to you, I may actually start to like you.
Yeah.
And if I start to like you, then I have to also now give some credit to the argument or the side you're bringing to the table. And so if I just dismiss you right now, I can just always just see you as two-dimensional. Your argument, the statement you say you stand up for, the sex you are, the class you are, the denomination. I can always see you as that and never see the person. Yeah. Because what usually happens, the more time we spend together, the more I begin to like you.
Yeah.
And so then I have to accept that maybe you might be right. This is a good guy. So if he's a good guy, then maybe I have to give some type of credibility to what he believes.
When we learn to value the person on the other side, changes everything.
It does.
That's what I hear you say.
Yes, absolutely.
What would you say are some of your tips in 2022 of how to have a meaningful conversation?
Okay.
Especially in difficult or challenging topics, etc.
I've said this before on our podcast. I'll say it again. Seek to understand as opposed to be understood.
Right.
Let's start there. So let's actually intentionally say, hey, I really want to know how you feel and why you feel that way. Yeah. Seek and understand. Number two, let's also recognize that we both have a lens that we see life through.
We talked about that
different,
before too.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's okay that yours is different. Now, stuff that I haven't said before. Number three, let's focus on what we do have in common. All right, so let's remember that there's a reason why we're even having this conversation. Yeah. So it's something so even if it's a person you never met before, you're arguing about politics. Yeah. Obviously, you're both passionate about politics. Okay, so we are both passionate about this, which means you're no less ignorant, no more a fool. You're like, it's something that you don't even like me at this point. You're just very passionate. Yeah. I'm passionate. And usually if someone's passionate about what I'm passionate about, I like talking to people like that. Okay? And then the fourth thing I think that we have to remember, so I gave you 2 old ones and 2 new ones. Remember they're passionate about what they are saying, so let's find something we agree on. And I think you got to, in the very beginning, and sometimes it takes place in the middle of the conversation, what do you really want to get out of this? Like, what do you want the end result to be? So do I want to be your friend when this is over? Do I want us to be married to my spouse when this is over? Right.
Yes.
So if my end game is that we're still walking in some type of relationship that I actually want, then I need to be very mindful about what I'm saying and how I'm feeling. In this conversation right now. Yeah, I like that. The way you manage your conversation. Yeah. Because I'm thinking long game here. I still want to like you. I still want to be liked by you.
I don't just want to win the battle. Right. I want to
win the war. That's right.
I want to be standing.
So I think that you got to ask yourself, hey, where do I want to go when it's over? And if I don't want to like you, well then, hey, have at it. But but just remember that they may not want to like you either.
That's right.
So I think you got to keep the ultimate end goal in mind.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest learning point in so many things has been learning to listen. Like you said, seek to understand. But I've found so much value in the last just 5-10 years of my own life asking people to share their story. Yeah. Just tell me about you. And I shut up and listen. Like, just tell me your story. And this happened with a friend of mine, Mike Sanford. that I got to know when I was doing campus ministry at MSU, Michigan State University. And as we got to know each other, I just listened because he was a black man and had all these experiences I'd never had, and I never had anyone share with me what was it like growing up black in an urban setting. You know, he was from the Detroit area, and just those experiences were so foreign to me and humanized that experience in a way that I'd never understood before. And I think it branded on me this value before I make any judgments about a people group or a person, I need to hear at least one person's story.
Yeah.
And one person's story isn't representative, but it just knowing what's on the other side instead of seeing the two-dimensional picture creates value in us. And it really is about value, because it will learning someone's why. You know, why are they defensive, or why are they cold in this situation, or why do they not want to go there? You hear their reason, you hear their story, then it grows compassion in you. And you can't just cancel someone anymore. You can't devalue them or just like check them off the list, like cut you out, delete, you know. And that's the heart of Jesus. He was always moved with compassion. And I think we have to listen. I think we have to see the life of another person so we can have stories, their story, and then we become compassionate. We become a better representation of Christ. So, I mean, we're speaking mostly to Christians, right? Like, if we're supposed to represent Jesus, we have to learn to grow compassion. I believe it comes from hearing other people's stories.
Yeah, that's good.
Seeing them as a whole person. When people become a caricature or a stereotype, you know, of their tribe or their party or their church affiliation, we've actually dehumanized them.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? And then we can devalue them.
Yes.
And that's actually really dangerous. Like,
it is.
You brought in some Bible here. We should probably bring in some Bible. I always think of Jesus's words. I think it's in the Sermon on the Mount. Forgive me for not having chapter and verse ready for you. But he essentially says, if you even like say about your brother or sister they're a fool, you're, in danger of the fires of hell. Because and what he's talking about is when we devalue someone. That's what it means to call someone a fool, is saying you are worthless.
Yeah.
You're worthless. And Jesus says that's worthy of the fires of hell, because that's at the root of it, that looking at another person or tribe and dehumanizing them is antithetical to God's nature, but it's the spirit of murder.
Yeah.
It says we don't need you.
Wow.
You're not important. You don't matter. And so, Jesus gets pretty heated about it. And I think this is why for us, that's, Christianity 101, Sermon on the Mount. This is how Jesus feels about that. We have to be not just like nicer. We have to be careful to humanize every human.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, I'm not making up Jesus' words. You're touching the fires of hell if you don't.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, we're talking about everyone.
Yeah.
Hitler.
Right.
Has to be human to us.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean what he did was okay.
Right.
At any stretch of imagination, but he's still an image bearer.
Yes.
And I have to honor at least the image of God in every human. Doesn't mean I have to agree with their politics or even their doctrine.
Are you looking over here?
I mean, I was trying not to, but I kind of was looking at you. I think I don't know. Let's not talk about your doctrine today. Any other last tips on how do you interact with a person you disagree with, or how do we really live love in such a divisive and combative culture? How do we live love?
That's a great question. I know we were going to kind of allude to this also. Like, can we live in a world where we are not offended, where it's unoffendable?
Yeah.
And the reality of it is no. We're going to be offended by one another at times. Obviously due to sin being in the world, but then secondly, because we don't all think and do the same thing. We're not robots. This is not an assembly line at GM with a bunch of robots and everybody does their part and that's it. We are people, free people who are thinking with choices, and there is no way that I can live in community with you for a long, extended period of time and not at some point be offended. It's okay to be offended. It's just what we do with that offense once it happens.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that we had to keep in mind with regards to this whole communication piece is being okay with being offended, being okay with at times offending somebody, but then knowing what to do when we are offended, go to your brother, and when we have offended, apologize because I have offended. Yeah. And so I know it's just small examples of what we need to do when offense takes place, but offense will always be here as long as you got more than one person in the room.
As long as there are other human beings,
that's right.
We will have the opportunity to be offended.
As long as there are other image bearers in the room,
and sin nature still crawling around. We will have opportunity to be offended. I've heard people talk about that we should live unoffendable, though, and I think there's something to that. I think it's necessary. I think what you're saying is true, that there will always be opportunity. To be offended, because there will always be the opportunity for conflict or pain.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Or opposition.
Yes, opposition. Yeah. It's how we respond to it. And I think we should be vigilant to rid ourselves of the offense. Because it's not even about you, it's about me. Like the Bible talks about, like, if we harbor that, we let a bitter root grow in us, and it will defile us, and not just us, the people around us. So what you said, I think, is the key. Like, we will have opposition, we will experience pain, but then we deal with it.
Yes.
We don't let bitterness grow. We don't carry around our offenses.
Right.
Because then we become defiled and defile others because we're carrying offense, we're carrying bitterness. And so I think the being passionate or committed to living as unoffendable as possible is really about taking care of my own soul.
Yeah, it is.
Because whether or not I'm offended at you doesn't hurt you. It actually hurts me.
It does. It does. It does.
You could go on living your life.
Because you're fine.
While I'm being eaten up by the cancer of bitterness.
Yes. Very true. My wife and I have learned this lesson. I should say I've learned it living with my wife, being married. There are times where she says things and it hurts me. And I have to, at some point, to begin to ask myself, why am I hurt? Right? What about what she said or did hurt me?
Again, it's about getting to the root.
That's getting to the root. And then I ask myself the question, okay, did she mean to hurt me? Do I think that my wife really wanted to hurt me? There are times when we're in an argument and we're going back and forth, and yes, you obviously intended to hurt me because you said something that was going to offend me. But then generally speaking, though, like when the offense first starts, generally speaking, they probably weren't looking to offend you unless that's just what they do to you.
Yeah.
And so I've even told my wife at times, okay, you think my motivation behind doing X, Y, and Z was this. That when do I intentionally look to sabotage
assumed motive again?
Assumed motive again. And she's like, well, only reason why you would do that is because that's why people do this. I said, wait a minute, though. We've been married for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Do you think I woke up this morning and say, I want to get under her skin this way? Like, do you think I wake up trying to think of ways to do that?
I mean, don't you, though?
No, I don't. Like, that's ridiculous.
You're not just trying to sow strife in your house.
No, because I'm sabotaging myself, right?
Right.
If
you have to live in that house,
I got to live with it, right? No. Now, if I'm trying to leave you, then obviously I may be sabotaging it. But so in that moment, I'm trying to ask her, like, let's ask ourselves some poignant questions about what's happening, just to make sure that we're not only dealing with the issue, but also trying to figure out why whatever it is bothers me so much.
Get to the root of it.
Get to the root of why I'm bothered. And there's been several times where I've come to the conclusion that my wife and I are just different.
Really?
And what she may have said or did is just not what I would have said or did.
Right.
It doesn't make it bad, doesn't make it wrong, doesn't make it any less than or worse than what I would have done. It just makes it different. And sometimes how she lives her life is an affront or an offense to me because of just how I've been raised. So it wasn't offensive, but to me, it was offensive. You're going to walk by this house, or walk by this kitchen and see them dishes and not wash them? Like, how did you not know you shouldn't wash your dishes? Like, stuff like that. And it's like, well, I mean, are they piled up, like running over the sink or is it just a few dishes? What's a few dishes in the sink? Common sense says wash the. No, common sense to you says that. Right?
Not everybody thinks like you,
Coye.
Thinks
like that. Right? How you know what I'm talking about her? Yeah. It was me. So
that's actually a great example. Two humans living in the same space with different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Learning to manage
Yeah.
and not assume motive. That's really good. So, all right, we should probably close this out. So you need to come up with like your banger, your best bang for your buck to close this thing out. How, again, the question was, how do we love? What does love look like? As Christians, we're called to love our neighbors in the middle of a divisive, cancel culture and just heightened agreement and a spirit of really just rage and offense. Okay, I'm gonna go first.
Okay.
Because I've thought about this, and I actually I return myself to this often. Now, again, we're assuming we're talking to mostly believers in the Pulpit Aside podcast. If you're not, I think this works anyways.
Yeah, sure.
It's the Word of God works.
Yes.
That'll preach, but we're not preaching. The Word of God works. 1 Corinthians 13, the passage about love, is to be our posture, whether it's the person you're married to, your friend, pastor down the street, your congregant, your co-worker. Love is patient. Love is kind. And then the ones that really get me is love always hopes. And to me, that means I'm going to, in the midst of conflict, believe the best. Always hopes, always believes, always perseveres. I'm going to not assume motive about you. I'm going to assume that as a good human being, you actually want to do what's right. You're not trying to sabotage my life, right? But that's literally what it's talking about there. Love always hopes. It always believes. It doesn't rejoice in evil, but celebrates the truth. And so my assumption about people, especially when I'm disagreeing with them, has to be love. They really mean well.
Yeah.
They're not out to harm me. Maybe they are, but love calls me to assume they're not.
Yeah.
God calls me to assume they're not. And in the middle of it, to be patient.
Good.
And in the middle of it, to be kind. I mean, I can't think of a better manual. I mean, that's an amazing passage of scripture because we love to quote it at weddings because it's very warm and fuzzy, but it was written to a church that was in complete turmoil. Yes. They were at each other's
and they were
throat.
fighting, right?
They were fighting. And so Paul says, hey, here's what you got to do. I mean, it makes a nice refrigerator magnet, but it's actually instruction for conflicted times.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting because before you shared your answer, I was thinking, well, what would I say? And I was thinking about love, and I thought about 1 Corinthians 13,
there you go. That's why
4
I took
through
it from
8.
You. I had to get it in first.
You did. You said it first. That is correct. And so I was going to sum it up this way because, you know, in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, it says love is patient, is kind, does not envy, does not boast, it's not arrogant, it's not rude.
All of that.
Right? You know, it does not insist on its own way.
Wow.
Kind of what you said. Let me not try to force my way. It says love is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. So this is kind of the thing of let me assume you weren't trying to hurt me when you said or did what you did. So love is these things. Now, the Bible commands us to love. Love is not a feeling. Love drives feelings. Love is action. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8 demonstrates the types of actions that love reflects or love does.
So good.
So I would say that, you know, if you really want to, you know, kind of that statement or that thought that really helps us deal with better communication with one another, I would say this: love is the actions I demonstrate so that I will like you. Because the Bible doesn't command me to like you. Commands me to love you.
That's good.
But if I do all of this stuff that love demands that I do,
I'm probably
gonna end up liking you. You know? So I would say at the end of the day, I want to end every conversation with when it's done, I want to like you.
Wow.
And so love is what I do in the midst of a conversation, opposition, difficult times, challenge with other people, because at the end of the day, I want to like you.
That's managing the conflict so that I don't just win the battle. We both are standing in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
That's good.
Way to drop the mic, bro.
What? We're not dropping these mics. These mics are expensive.
I mean, we're going to end the podcast
Hey, I'm
now.
just saying. Hey, that's fine. Just don't drop no mics, all right?
And while you're out there not dropping the mics, thanks for stopping by the Pulpit Aside podcast. We look forward to joining you again as we put the pulpit aside.
Thank you for joining us. Take care. God bless.